folks. Thanks.
It's great to be with you this morning. Yes, I have come from London, but they're making me work very hard for my carbon footprint of that journey. So anyway, I'm Jill Lofts. I look after sustainability for the financial services sector at EY. We're going to take a look at voluntary carbon markets today, some of the challenges, some of the significant changes that need to occur in order to scale up and in order for carbon markets to potentially make a meaningful and impactful contribution. So before we start on that, I'm going to cover off some of the challenges. And sadly, as many of you will know, there are many. So it's a complex, heterogeneous market. It's highly fragmented. There's limited pricing data. So for the purchasers, it's difficult for them to know, have they got a good price? They also take on the project risk. And then they are obviously subject to greenwashing risk in terms of their use of offset. So that's all fairly complex for the buyers. For the sellers, it's equally complex, again, because of the lack of pricing, because of the lack of a pipeline, because of a lack of security. It can often mean that it's difficult for them to feel confident about initiating some of these projects. The poor quality of data, the fragmented market infrastructure add to the issues. I am going to keep going, and then we'll talk about the rest of the session is going to be positive. Standards, verification, accountancy methods vary. There is a limited amount of regulation globally and locally around voluntary carbon markets. And I think overall, I'd say it feels like a very immature market. It has low liquidity. It has scarce financing. There are inadequate risk management services and limited data availability. So why on earth would you jump into this? Well, we are going to spend this session talking about what can change, what needs to change, and how this market can scale, how it can be leveraged, not only for offsetting purposes, but also for financing really important initiatives around climate finance, and especially, I think, the Global South. So as we kick off, again, we have an amazing panel here. I'm going to start with Jonathan. And previously, if you could just say a few words about your role. And I'd like to ask you, Jonathan, about, from a financial institutions perspective, what do you think the role of sustainable finance is in enhancing voluntary carbon markets? And how can that help to foster market growth, and achieve the purchasers' sustainability requirements?
Perfect. So I'm Jonathan Hackett. I lead sustainable finance at BMO. I won't even say what that means because I think the answer here is synonymous, which is what we do is give clients advice when they're navigating complex topics that deal with sustainability that they don't have a reason that they should be able to resource internally. If you think about one of the challenges we've seen in sustainability is everyone saying, okay, I need 30 people, and then going out and asking, where do I find 30 sustainability experts that are willing to join my company, and then finding out that that doesn't exist. And I think the voluntary carbon markets have been a very similar story where people for many years would go out and they'd say, no, I put someone on it. They used to do our donations, but now they've been looking at all these glossy reports and they really like the pictures of these windmills and the pictures of these trees. And that's our offsetting strategy. And so what we think the role of a bank is to give people advice and help them navigate that uncertainty, help them understand what a credible offsetting strategy looks like, and to be able to put together guideposts to say, look, like the goal is not actually to buy carbon credits. In the same way that nobody actually pays you for doing a good thing, you have to develop carbon credits by following a rigorous pathway that has outside approval and to be able to demonstrate with data that you've done the things that you said you were going to do. That's what people actually pay you for. In the same way, nobody rewards you actually for going out and buying carbon credits even if that's a good thing. They pay you for, or reward you for, having a clear reasoning as to how this fits into your overall decarbonization strategy, how you purchase the right credits that actually will contribute not just to near-term balance of carbon in the atmosphere, but also into us having the solutions that we need at the scale that we need in the future. And so having methods that people can engage with that actually give the credibility of what they're doing, and then that tie it back to building the financial market that needs to be there for these products. If you go out and you buy from a secondary broker, no offense to any secondary brokers here, you're actually not catalyzing anything. And if the value of a carbon credit is what it does in the world, and you're just paying somebody that got rich on it by buying early and flipping it and didn't actually provide inherent financing to what they were doing, you're actually not helping those projects. You're just trying to buy a certificate in the secondary market, and that's today not what drives pricing. And so we help clients navigate that pricing and those structures in order to do things credibly.
And follow-up question to that, if I can. Any major themes in terms of, what you're advising clients, or kind of what they're specifically looking to do in terms of their strategy?
Yeah, so the carbon markets, I would say, have had a bit of a melodrama over the last, few years of people really believing that we were going to get clarity in a way of what offsetting could look like in a way that was credible, and then many, many, many circles and arguments, and nothing that really gives you here's a singular marker. We think a lot about the Oxford Principles as being a methodology or an approach that does have a lot of credibility. The challenge is, if you look at the Oxford Principles, there is a chart in there of, the different categories of carbon and what it looks like to go from where you are to 2050. And as a recovering mathematician and physicist, if I tell you there's a curve and 2 points on that curve, if it were a line, it would be very simple, but there are actually infinite curves that go through wherever you are today and 100% removals in 2050. And so there's a lot of work still to be done to give people an explanation and a reasoning as to why they're looking across the different categories. And for all that, there is a very easy answer. Yeah. The answer of I'm going to purchase 100% removals today, and I'm only going to do it from easily verifiable mechanical methodologies. That works for currently around 3 companies globally, and they can't meet their needs in that market. And also they have a set of resourcing that I would describe as near infinite, if you think about the profit lines of software-based services at scale. And so what we need is a reasoning that you can look at and can approach for other companies, we'll call them mortal companies, that also will help us develop the market that we need. And so being able to think about those different categories of carbon and what of them are going to be where they need to be in the next 30 years is the work.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We're in the middle of some research at the moment around, sort of linked to what you've just said. One element is firms who have carbon credits, carbon offsetting as part of their strategy. And what we've found is typically their net zero ambitions, they are more ambitious than those who don't have. So obviously all yet to see, because it's all in the future, as you say, and there's many curves, but I think that's interesting. And the other thing that we're seeing is, particularly as you alluded to, giant software, Gen AI, blah, 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 houses, who clearly know that they're going to have an exponential demand for power, looking at direct offtake rather than necessarily going through the voluntary carbon markets, which again I think is quite interesting. And the research that we've undertaken so far estimates that the direct offtake is nearly double, actually. So interesting moves afoot. Lorraine, let me move to you. So can we talk a little bit about, and obviously if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself when you start off, but I'd like to pick up on the point around that Jonathan made around how voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits can genuinely impact and have a positive impact on climate change and sustainability.
Thank you, Jill. So I'm Lorraine Audsley. I've had a 30-plus career in international trade, corporate and structured finance, risk management, and sustainability, most recently as the Chief Risk and Sustainability Officer at Export Development Canada. More recently than that, I've transitioned to work with EY in the Financial Institutions Risk Management team, focusing on climate risk management. And I have a particular interest in nature risk management as well, and nature-based solutions as a big part of the solution to climate change. So yes, the question, so you've laid out all the challenges, and I would like to look at it from a positive perspective, because notwithstanding the challenges, there's a lot of good that can come from VCM. So there's different types of credits. There's carbon removal, carbon avoidance, carbon reduction. So the carbon removal credits are the most powerful because they're the ones that are actually extracting emissions from the atmosphere. So I like to look at the underlying projects initially. So the projects, the credits come from the projects. So if you think about various projects, so carbon removal, like I say, would be extracting emissions from the atmosphere and somehow storing those. So a nature-based solution for that would be reforestation, for example. And I was just talking to a company last week in Brazil called Cambium. Their whole MO is to create these projects, to actually reforest parcels of land, in their case, Argentina and Paraguay, and therefore, by doing so, creating the credits. So that's a nature-based example. An engineered example would be something we talk about a lot, direct air capture, where, again, extracting emissions and then, in that case, either storing them in situ or transporting them and storing them often underground in geological rock. So the underlying project, I think, matters a lot to the credit. So I would say certainly have a look at that. The big names we talked about, Microsoft looks at carbon removal credits because they generally have the higher chance of genuinely decarbonizing. So then projects have various attributes. I'll cover a couple. One is very important, is additionality. Additionality means that the capital flowing to that project, the project itself would not otherwise happen without the revenue from those carbon credits. So again, if you have good additionality on a project, then you can be a bit more confident that you are actually contributing to global decarbonization, as opposed to the project would have happened anyway without those credits. So the notion of additionality, Google, I know, focuses a lot on that. They want to say that, the credits that we bought went directly, like we directly affected global decarbonization, so helps with their greenwashing. So there's another attribute that I'll cover is permanence, and so the more likely that those emissions that are extracted are permanently removed from the atmosphere, again, is something that can genuinely contribute to decarbonization. Given my two examples, again, the direct air capture, more likely those emissions are going to stay in that rock underground, so you've got a good chance of those emissions permanently being removed. The reforestation one, despite my love of nature and preference for those types of projects, those trees could in the future, and permanence is thought of in the terms of 100 years. So those trees could be cut down, they could be burned through wildfires. So they're no longer capturing that air, and in fact, they're actually emitting some of those emissions back into the atmosphere. So permanence matters. The third one, maybe I'll just quickly mention, is quantification. So these projects are estimating emissions that are going to be avoided, reduced, or removed. So the methodology used for actually quantifying those emissions matters and should be based on global standards and should be conservative as well. So that's a little bit about the projects. The credits themselves, and I think Jonathan has mentioned that there are entities out there that do provide verification and assurance. I mean, optimally, we would want widespread global standards, global registry, global verifiers, credit raters, carbon credit raters. But absent that, it's a fragmented market, and there are players out there that do some of this. So there's the Integrity Council for VCM that has their core carbon principles. They include some of what I've mentioned, but also things like tracing, tracking, third-party verification. There's Verra, one of the large registries. They look at credits and assure those credits. They issue voluntary carbon units, I think they're called, VCUs. One VCU is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed. So I would say to genuinely believe that you're removing contributing to decarbonization, look at the underlying projects, understand what they're doing, and consider some of those attributes of additionality, permanence, quantification, and then work with credit providers, carbon credit providers in the ecosystem to try and assure those credits. So those are some of my thoughts.
No, thank you. And I think it nicely links what both of you have said, right? So you have your strategy, you think particularly around the detail on how you're going to implement that strategy, because whilst there is a, as you say, lack of global registries, lack of global standards, lack of global verifiers, etc., it does feel like driving forward, being robust and being as precise as you can as an organisation, it feels like that's a way to go forward. Michael, let me come to you again. Brief introduction when you answer. But so we've sort of said, let's be quite precise about what we're trying to achieve and think about the specific projects and measure it, etc., etc. Perfect. But I'd like to sort of now go back to what about strategic partnerships and collaborations? How do you think, how will these play a role in rapid and effective evolution of the market?
Thank you, Jill. So very quickly, Michael Mexis, I'm with IBM Consulting, and aside from technology consulting, we are one of the largest management consulting services, including procurement outsourcing services. I lead the global category in energy services and renewables for my clients. I have a different perspective, is that I'm more on the sourcing and contracting side. I work a lot with developers, and we've done a lot of projects right around the world. In terms of strategic partnerships, we are definitely seeing from our clients that they are putting more skin in the game in the projects that they want to, that are important to them. Additionality is definitely key. We are seeing a bigger shift in our clients wanting to make sure that those projects do qualify for additionality. They do qualify for the RE100 standard. They have targets that they need to meet. And the strategic partnerships really come from all levels of, whether it's finance, government, the developer. What we are finding is we're seeing a lot more of demand for credit supports, especially on the finance side. So projects that our clients have direct involvement in, they are working with the seller to make sure that they have set aside project development supports, so that the money is set aside, whether that's in a letter of credit, whether that's in an escrow account, whether that's in a bond or a bank guarantee. We're seeing a lot of that, especially from the timing from the project starting to when that project is going live or COD. And in addition to that, our clients and our buyers are also looking to our sellers to provide development credit support. So throughout the lifespan of the project, that if there are any targets or any goals that are not met, they want to make sure that there's compensation for that. So we are seeing a lot of, on the financing side, more commitment of funds from the developers on seller support, on seller credit supports in those areas. On the buyer side, we're actually also seeing the sellers putting demands on the buyer to be more financially viable and putting more money into these projects. So we're seeing definitely credit worthiness of the buyers become really key as a strategic partnership. And it has an impact on whether the seller will proceed with the project or price it differently. So these strategic partnerships, we are seeing them. We are seeing less in terms of just, generally buying RECs, whether they're unbundled, or carbon credits, and we are looking at more of these strategic type projects that our clients want to make sure that they have some involvement in. But again, the financing side is very important, especially for the developer and for the buyer. From the government side on strategic development, we're also looking, we've been able to participate in a lot of the US programs, especially since the IRA. We recently did a project in California where we were able to qualify for their NEM 2.0 project financing that was able to provide financing through the developer to help bring a positive NPV. That's also key, is that we're seeing part of this strategy is that these projects have to or need to deliver some sort of positive NPV. in these projects, there's less of an appetite for negative NPV. We're seeing that quite often. It makes it challenging, especially in the United States, where there are a lot of regulated jurisdictions where the electricity price is quite subsidized. We try to do some projects also in Taiwan, where Thai power is a heavily subsidized electricity price and near impossible to get a positive NPV. So it's a much more challenging to get those off the ground. So you do need to make some commitments. You need to make sure that the financing is there and those partnerships are in place. In terms of the carbon credits, what we are also finding from our clients is they're shying more away from the US, and they're applying more of those in jurisdictions where the RECs are not necessarily to the international standard. They're not IREC or TIGR standard, or they meet the RE100. So they might look at verified carbon emission credits. Places like China, for example, we're seeing more of that because those RECs will not be recognized internationally. So we're seeing a little bit more of that. And again, really from the strategy side, it all comes down to having all parties putting in some sort of supports to make these projects come to fruition.
Thank you. So, so I'm getting the feeling that, you know, you have to have this well-connected ecosystem in order to get the deals away, keep them funded, make sure that they are doing what they need to do. Could I ask, could you give me one comment on, you know, what might change that would actually really start to scale this up to a kind of a different dimension?
So I think we're seeing that in terms of the direct off-taker, especially for large-scale solar, large-scale wind projects that we're seeing in the United States. So we are seeing that scaling up. We are probably managing right now from our clients probably well over 2 million terawatt hours. And that's either sourced or in the contracting phase. So, but it's that direct off-take that is really scaling up these type of projects. Now, a lot of that is really more a beneficiary on the additionality, and less so on the voluntary carbon market.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Let me follow up with you, Jonathan, if I can. Question on what else could happen, again, whether we're talking off-take or voluntary carbon market, because we've decided we agree that that is an approach here. But what else could change within this ecosystem that would help to scale, whether it's VCM or off-take?
Yeah, so I think one of the questions, and it ties very much back, is just this, you know, how do we bring all the tools that we have elsewhere and apply them to a new project type? And some of those places, it's a lot easier and more straightforward, where you say, okay, if I'm going to, you know, capture carbon and put it down in the earth, that looks like a flow of molecules that's very analogous to other things that we financed in the past. Just directions are a little different, and, you know, it has some subtleties, but it's something that's more normally financeable. And so if you're able to bring offtakes, if you're able to bring all these partners to the table, then you get to a package that looks like we can use all of the great tools of finance. And I'm one of those insane people that believes that financial technology is one of the greatest inventions of humankind to drive positive change in the world. And if we can bring those tools to bear for these kinds of projects, we'll achieve really great things. Nature-based solutions, that's a lot harder, right? If you get into counterfactuals, which if you're not married to a statistician, what would have happened were you not to have done what you did? Those types of things are really bad when you put them into a contract that's supposed to be completely rock solid, so that someone's willing to give you, you know, non-recourse project financing to get a project done. And so how do we find new tools and new solutions to help accelerate what we're doing? How do we get to common standards that allow you to get to the concept of replacement on non-delivery? Because, you know, one of the weirdest things is that we talk about carbon as an environmental commodity, and it's not a commodity today. And to some extent, the greatest proponents of it shouldn't want it to be a commodity, because there are some things that are $2 a ton to do that are great for the world, and there are some things that are $1,000 a ton that are also great for the world, and you want both of those things to happen, and that doesn't happen under commodification. And then we end up in a bad state of not where we want to be. But I think partnerships that bring together people that are willing to do new things that are willing to do the hard work are really essential at this stage. We made a contribution to Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. That is a concessionary project equity and financing vehicle, obviously associated with Breakthrough Energy. And the whole point is to do it the first time with every support that you can possibly imagine, where, it's not actually how it works, but basically that, one of the richest people in the world is kind of standing behind and saying, this is going to work. I will put enough money into this project that everyone will get their debt back. And the equity might not return anything, but you'll probably get your equity back, and we'll make this work. And then afterwards, when you go to your credit committee the next time, and they say, but we've never done it before, you say, no, we have done it before, and it worked. And now, this next time, we'll have a positive NPV, rather than, not, and you're able to do something new because the first time you had, 100 people pushing behind you, making it work.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up with the final question, I guess relatively rapid fire from each of you, starting with Lorraine. Just really your long-term vision of voluntary carbon markets and the role that they will play in the world reaching net zero.
Well, there are all sorts of estimates out there that indicate it, grow 50-fold to now in 2030 and beyond and such. And so I think some of the things we've talked about here about how to scale that are really important. Something we haven't talked about is blended finance and the notion that the public money comes in and takes the first risks. Maybe with a rapid fire, I'll use that as my major point, that, these are new technologies often cases, and the public money has to come in and de-risk those projects to allow the private money to flow. And so that's one of the key things. There's lots of room for innovation in the markets as well, things like related to monitoring, reporting, verification. Satellites. There's a wonderful Canadian company called GHG Sat, which has, I think, 12 or so satellites up there right now. They're measuring things like emissions so that they can give data to a company and say, this is where your emissions leakages are happening, and then they can go and solve those. So I think the data, things like AI to process huge amounts of data as well, blockchain for tracking and tracing. There's immense opportunity for innovation, I think, to help scale and drive the VCM. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Same question to Jonathan.
Yeah, I think to me the place that we need to get to is the idea of a standardized approach on offsetting on the corporate side, where the question of how you're going about doing it isn't a question, because it's not something that companies are resourced to do, nor something that encourages any kind of action. And so if we're able to give people clear pathways of this is a valid approach, I think we will see rapid adoption and proliferation, and that is what we need. We need to get from a small percentage of the world's emissions included in either a compliance or voluntary market to 100%. And that only works if people have the confidence that they're not going to be punished for engaging positively in the market.
Thank you. Michael.
Where I see probably the growth will be more for my clients, especially to offset their fossil fuel use directly. And so where I see some of the categories of growth are going to be fleet electrification. That's going to grow the carbon market. And also the reduction of direct use of fossil fuels. So things like battery electricity storage, things like fuel cell, green hydrogen development to offset some of the natural gas or liquefied propane gas usage at industrial sites.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Clearly, half an hour isn't enough time to cover the whole voluntary carbon markets debate, but hopefully the panel here have given you some really good insights and some practical explanations of where we are today and where things might move to in the future. So a huge round of applause and thank you to our panelists.